The factory replaced the forge, and warfare would never be the same again. Before the Industrial Revolution, armies fought in ways that hadn't changed much for centuries. Soldiers stood in lines, firing muskets that were slow and inaccurate. Generals often rode horses, commanding their men with flags and drums. Wars were certainly brutal, but their scale was limited. It was limited by how many weapons could be made by hand. It was limited by how far an army could march in a day. It was limited by the power of a cannonball fired from a smoothbore cannon. Everything was about muscle, wind, and animal power. The world was on the cusp of a total transformation, one that would reach far beyond the factory floor and into the very heart of human conflict. Then, starting in the late 18th century, the world began to change at a speed never seen before. This was the Industrial Revolution. Factories with smoking chimneys sprang up across Britain, Europe, and America. These new factories could produce goods in enormous quantities. They used machines powered by steam, not by people. This revolution in making things, from textiles to tools, soon found its way to the military. Suddenly it was possible to equip armies not with hundreds of handmade muskets, but with thousands of factory-made rifles. The same industrial might that built railways could now forge cannons of immense size and power, completely altering the calculations of generals and statesmen alike. This shift was not just about making more weapons, it was about making better, more complex weapons. The precision of machines allowed for a new level of engineering. Instead of a simple musket ball, factories could produce a pointed bullet that flew straighter and farther. This was a game changer. An army with these new weapons could inflict casualties from a much greater distance. The old tactics of marching in neat formations towards the enemy became suicidal. The battlefield was about to become a far more dangerous and anonymous place, where the individual soldier's bravery was often overshadowed by the sheer mechanical power of the weapons being used against them. The Industrial Revolution also changed how armies were supplied and moved. Before, armies had to carry their food and ammunition in slow-moving wagons pulled by horses or oxen. This severely limited how far they could go and how long they could fight. With the invention of the steam locomotive and the railway, everything changed. Huge numbers of soldiers, along with their guns, food, and ammunition, could be moved across vast distances in just a few days. This meant that wars could be fought on a much larger scale, involving entire nations rather than just professional armies. The age of industrialized total war was dawning. One of the first major changes on the battlefield was the rifle. Old muskets were smooth on the inside of the barrel. This made the musket ball tumble, so it wasn't very accurate. Rifles, however, had spiral grooves cut inside the barrel. This rifling made the bullet spin, keeping it stable and accurate over long distances. During the American Civil War in the 1860s, both sides used mass-produced rifles like the Springfield and the Enfield. A soldier with a rifle could now hit a target from 500 yards away, a distance unimaginable for a musket. This turned battlefields into deadly killing zones where soldiers had to dig trenches to survive. Just as the rifle was changing infantry tactics, an even more terrifying weapon appeared: the machine gun. Early versions, like the Gatling gun, were cranked by hand and could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. By the late 19th century, inventors like Hiram Maxim created the first true, fully automatic machine gun. It used the power of the recoil from each shot to load and fire the next one. A single Maxim gun had the firepower of 50 riflemen. Generals were slow to understand its impact, but by World War I, the machine gun dominated the battlefield. It forced soldiers into a stalemate of trench warfare, as any advance across open ground was met with a storm of bullets. Artillery also became much bigger and deadlier. New industrial processes allowed for the creation of massive cannons made from steel, not brittle iron. These new guns could fire explosive shells, not just solid cannonballs. These shells would explode on impact, sending deadly metal fragments or shrapnel flying in all directions. During World War I, battles often began with gigantic artillery bombardments that lasted for days. The goal was to destroy enemy trenches and barbed wire. The sheer destructive power of this new artillery reshaped the landscape, turning fertile fields into cratered moonscapes and contributing to the immense casualty figures of the war. The combination of these new weapons fundamentally changed the experience of battle. War became less personal. It was no longer about lines of men seeing their opponents. Instead, it was an industrial process of killing. Soldiers crouched in muddy trenches, often killed by an enemy they never saw. Death came from a sniper's bullet, a burst of machine gun fire, or an artillery shell fired from miles away. The Industrial Revolution had removed the human scale from combat and replaced it with the cold, brutal efficiency of the machine. The courage of soldiers was still vital, but it was now pitted against the overwhelming power of industrial firepower. For centuries, naval power meant wooden ships with tall masts and canvas sails. Ships like HMS Victory were floating wooden fortresses armed with rows of cannons that fired solid iron balls. Battles were slow, chaotic affairs, often decided by which crew could fire faster and which captain could best use the wind. A ship's strength was in the thickness of its oak hull and the skill of its sailors. This entire way of fighting, which had dominated the seas for hundreds of years, was about to be made obsolete by the power of steam and iron. The age of sail was coming to a dramatic and definitive end. The first big change was the steam engine. Steam-powered ships did not need wind to move. They could travel in a straight line against the current and in any direction they wanted. This gave naval commanders incredible freedom and predictability. The first steam warships were paddle wheelers, which were vulnerable. But soon the screw propeller was invented, which was placed underwater and was much better protected. In the 1850s, navies around the world began building fleets of steam-powered frigates. These ships could move faster and more reliably than any sailing ship, allowing navies to project power across the globe with newfound speed. The next great leap was the use of iron instead of wood. Wooden ships were very vulnerable to the new explosive shells being developed for cannons. In response, shipbuilders began adding iron plates to the sides of wooden ships. These were the first ironclads. The famous battle between the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia during the American Civil War showed everyone that wooden warships were now useless. The cannonballs of older ships simply bounced off the iron armor. This battle signaled the start of a naval arms race, as countries rushed to build bigger and better ironclad warships to control the seas. By the early 20th century, this evolution reached its peak with the creation of the Dreadnought. Launched by Britain in 1906, HMS Dreadnought was a ship so advanced it made all previous battleships obsolete overnight. It was powered by revolutionary steam turbines, making it the fastest battleship in the world. It was heavily armored with thick steel plates. Most importantly, it was armed with 10 massive 12-inch guns, all of the same size. This meant it could fire devastating broadsides at enemy ships from many miles away. The Dreadnought class of battleship, a true product of industrial might, would become the ultimate symbol of naval power leading into World War I. The changes brought by the Industrial Revolution created the blueprint for modern warfare. The ideas of mass production, rapid mobilization, and overwhelming firepower became central to military thinking. World War I is often seen as the ultimate industrial war, where the industrial output of entire nations was channeled into a brutal conflict of attrition. The millions of artillery shells fired, the thousands of machine guns produced, and the vast railway networks supplying the front lines were all a direct consequence of the industrial changes from the century before. The scale of the slaughter was something the world had never witnessed, and it was made possible by the factory. This legacy continued into World War II and beyond. The tank, which first appeared in World War I, was essentially an armoured industrial engine, combining the internal combustion engine, caterpillar tracks and firepower. Airplanes evolved from fragile wooden fabric machines into all-metal bombers and fighters produced on massive assembly lines just like cars. The naval arms race that began with ironclads culminated in gigantic aircraft carriers, floating cities that were monuments to industrial engineering. The principles remained the same: use technology and industrial capacity to create more powerful and more mobile weapon systems to overwhelm the enemy. Even today, in 2025, we live with the legacy of the Industrial Revolution's impact on war. While warfare has become more digital, the core principles are still there. The mass production of drones, the complex supply chains that equip armies, and the reliance on advanced technology all have their roots in the factories of the 19th century. The idea that a nation's industrial and technological strength is directly linked to its military power is a concept born from this era. Modern military might is not just measured in soldiers, but in a country's ability to design, manufacture and supply sophisticated weaponry on a massive scale. Understanding this history is crucial because it shows us that technology has always been a driving force in how wars are fought. The Industrial Revolution was not just a period of social and economic change, it was a military revolution that made warfare far more destructive and total. It created a permanent link between a nation's industry and its ability to wage war, an arms race that continues to this day in new forms. Looking at a modern jet fighter or a complex missile system, we can still see the echoes of the smoking factories and ingenious inventors who, 2 centuries ago, forever changed the face of battle.